Welcome to the Pulse Check podcast,
Yeah,
Troy Lim.
thank you.
Welcome on board. Welcome on board not only to the podcast, but also to Synpulse.
Yeah, very excited.
Yeah, very excited to have you on board as head of Insurance APAC, but also a lot of experience in banking, of course. Over 25 years in consulting, so really a lot of experience we bring on board. Very excited and thanks for making the podcast today. Also to get to know you, but also to talk about insurance, innovation, fintech, and so on. But before I go there, a bit of an icebreaker as usual. What makes you you? What makes you Joel?
Yeah, I guess for me, I've basically always been interested and grew up in engineering. So I guess from that perspective, very structured kind of thinking. But I think I've always had a flip side around adventure, really. And so, a lot of my early years used to backpack travel around the world. And I think that the way that maybe something's unique about me is, I really see those two things really merging in a lot of what I do and what I'm passionate about in my career in technology and adventure. How does that two thing comes together? For me, I see tech as, every time you walk around a mountain, you don't know what's around there, right? And, there's sometimes another valley you have to go through. It's tough. Sometimes there's amazing scenes, right? And for me in tech, it's always been like that as well. And I think this is the thing I enjoy most about engineering and technology in my whole career is that it's ever changing, right? And the way you apply tech, the way you see an impact at clients and in the industry and the broader world, I think this is kind of what I'm most passionate about. And I think that's kind of maybe something a little bit unique about me. Yeah.
I love it. And I agree. As a consultant, you need to be ready for something new every day. And it's almost like an adventure every day, depending when your clients suddenly change their decisions or change their opinion. And with this, we can maybe go into the topic of the day. And I would love to start with some of the key trends you see in insurance.
Yeah. Look, my view, and maybe taking a step back a little bit, right? And I think particularly with technology and the sector moving so quickly, I think it's always important to go back and think, look, insurance is about protection, right? Mm-hmm. And fundamentally as a business, insurance is really about risk management and investment management in many ways, right? And I think when you think about that at a broader level, I think the current environment is somewhat unique, I would say, because there's a lot of macro changes happening that's impacting insurers and a lot of our clients today, right? So, you got everything from climate change, advancement in technology, changing consumer sentiment, right, and how they buy, digital, etc. And even just advancements in things like autonomous driving, right, impacting motor insurance, things like that. And so it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of opportunities, but there's also a lot of challenges for insurers today. And I think this is the environment that we're living in right now. And I think this is again, great opportunity for us to really make a difference with clients in this sector. So.
Yeah, and that make a difference. I always say that insurance best is to actually buy an insurance in a good moment, not in a bad moment. You don't want to, and you probably wouldn't get insurance the moment where there's an accident.
Right. That's right.
And especially we had the topic around adventure before. If you sign up for an adventure, you may not even think of actually it might be good to have an insurance.
Correct.
And that brings me also a bit to those trends, embedded insurance. It should actually be embedded into what you're doing. But does embedded insurance say for you, and what do you see in terms of trends in the area of embedded insurance?
I think definitely embedded insurance is something that's emerging more and more. I think for many reasons, right? So one, I think there's a broader convergence, I would say, in the financial services industry. And I think it's not just for insurance, but also banking generally, where the core products and proposition needs to move to a place where it meets customer needs directly, right? And I think in the insurance world, it's still, let's say, quite traditional that, you get to think, like to your example, you have to think about, hey, I need some protection. I need to now go out and look for an insurer to say buy a home insurance or a health insurance, whatever. And that's kind of the current, predominant state, right? But I think where the world's moving to, particularly with digitalization, is that a lot of insurers are looking to bring their products to the customer, right? And in this case, to your phone, to where you need it, right? And I think the easiest example of that is, say, travel insurance, which is very common now. When you're buying your ticket, you could go click the button and get travel insurance. Now, those kind of relationships, I think, are fairly well understood. But I think what we're seeing a trend now is more and more push from insurers to get more embedded into everyday lives, right? So already years ago, I remember, and this is actually with Tesla, 2016, moving into Hong Kong and looking at insurance plays here. The idea of actually having the car self-insured, essentially, right, as a product. Why? Because the data and therefore the risk profiles for the driver, etc., technically is kind of embedded within the product now that product is generating data for everywhere you drive, weather conditions, everything. That's not that far a stretch. I mean, that is available from a technical perspective today, right? And you could almost say that buying the car comes with the insurance inherently, right? And that's how it should be. Versus you buy the product, then you have to go somewhere else, or talk to another agent to go buy the protection. And I think these kind of trends are happening more and more. And I think you see it in consumer products now, at least in Hong Kong. It's very common to get your iPhone protected, okay? But many have gone beyond that now to subscription programs. Right, and kind of think, well, what's that got to do with insurance? It's essentially the same thing, right? Because all the subscription programs in Hong Kong, so for example, you can pay a monthly fee to a telco provider to get a phone, but it's protected. So if you damage the phone, because it's actually not your asset, right? It's actually the bank's asset. That is insured, and in that transaction, the consumer's not filling out a separate form. They're not kind of going around sideways to try to find a product. It's embedded in the product. And I think this is the trend. I'd argue that many people are not aware that they actually have insurance or are participating in some sort of an insurance policy in a lot of everyday life now more than before, right? And I think that's kind of the beauty of it, right? So,
and I would love to go more towards that almost invisible insurance.
Yes.
Unfortunately, when it comes to insurance for your Tesla in Hong Kong, while it's been promoted, many people have a Tesla in Hong Kong. There's only one insurance.
Yes.
And there's not a good way to even compare.
Correct. Yes.
I'm quite surprised because I'm Swiss. In Switzerland, you would have then a comparison website where you would have different options and so on. And here it's just one. And with then also manual subscription once a year renewal, it's quite a hassle.
Correct. And I think what you're touching on, and I think, again, this is both a challenge and opportunity, is that, the technology has clearly got to the point where this is already possible, right? And to some degree, it's not even hard to do anymore. However, there are cultural and regulatory nuances in every market, right? I won't spend too much time on this, but in Hong Kong, it's a lot of that is through because of the way distribution is done, and how certain distributors, in this case, distributors being the car brand, have signed up with certain insurers, right? And that's how it's been done. And for that reason, there's often sometimes lack of innovation because that segment channel is locked in, right? Regardless of how good your tech is or how convenient it is, But if you look at our markets, like you said, a little bit more open. In the US, Tesla's offering their insurance now, right, in certain markets. So if you kind of take some of these examples, and I do see this as both the challenge and the opportunity, is that the application of technology to really change, at the end of the day, the consumer behavior, and it's, I think, what's going to drive it. It's there. And I think this is where we can help a lot of clients in various markets in different ways, because every market is slightly different, especially in Asia, right? Really make a difference, right? And I think that it's not as simple as, hey, we're going to take something that works in the US or Europe and make it work here. It doesn't always work that way, right? But that the technology does work, and then you got to think, well, how do we apply this into the current market in a way that makes a difference for customers here, or in Singapore, in Thailand, whatever, I think this is kind of the secret sauce, right? This is kind of where value comes together, and it's not just about tech. It's not just about people change and kind of industry change, right? It's these two things coming together that I think creates the most opportunity.
But coming back then, as you're an engineer by heart, same as me, what are some of the things you would want to see in the next 5 to 10 years from now? I mean, really, what does the future hold for Insurtech?
Okay, for Insurtech. I think as an engineer, one of the things, I don't remember many things from my uni days in engineering, but one thing I think in principle that is still very valuable that, I still apply is to go back to the fundamentals of the business, right? What I find with many clients in, everything from operational efficiency to distribution channels on new product development, I think it's often good to go back to the core principles, the foundation blocks, right? Of what makes that product, why that product, how's various systems delivering that product. Because I think this is the root of innovation, right? You realize that, at least in my career, I've realized that a lot of why and how things are being done has kind of grown up through a very long history. And sometimes, people don't question those anymore. And these limitations are often arbitrary, right? And it constrains a lot of businesses in terms of the way they think about problems, right? I'll give you a great example of that. I did a piece of work years ago now with a very large insurer in Hong Kong. And the ask was very simple. Hey, can you come help us optimize our claims process and things like that? And I say, yeah, we can do that. And, of course, we went in, our pitch, we're going to do customer-centric approach. Yes. Everyone's, very keen. And we actually did a real customer-centric approach, which I think when we ran that project was a bit of a surprise because for the insurer, customer-centric was, hey, the customer lodges the claim and we deal. I go, no, that's not where it begins, right? Where it begins is the realization that the customer needs protection into the buy process, into, in this case, for health, getting sick. Then they see the doctor, then they logically, the circle doesn't, the journey doesn't start with the lodgement of the claim. The journey started well before that, right? And once you bring in that perspective, right, you see many other things, right? And I won't go through kind of details of that, but, I think that really opened the eyes for the insurer. They were thinking, hey, actually, maybe if we tweak some process here, but actually at the end of the day, the biggest impact they could make was actually within the distribution network.
Yeah.
So that review, that strategy piece led us to actually look into how do we optimize the network, things like data transmission, standards, moving away from paper, things like that, right? Versus I think what the client had in mind originally was, hey, maybe come in and tweak my processes here. Okay, that's not going to get you much. But if you fix only a few things here, that's going to be massive downstream impact for you, right? And funnily enough, several startups after their projects got formed to try to service that intermediary from a data perspective, right? And look, I think that's just an example where I think if you go back to the basics and kind of go, look, what are we solving for here, right? What's the real problem? I think this is kind of the root of innovation, right? And
exactly, it's the first principle design, basically. First principle thinking and then design. But that brings me also to the Insurtech companies in general. So while, of course, as a trusted advisor, consultant, of course, you can help those insurers to innovate, but also these Insurtech, while they're disruptive, they also push for a bit more competition. So how do you see that play between the bigger, more incumbent traditional insurers and the more Insurtech companies?
Look, I think it's great because generally, I think the insurance industry in Asia is still lagging from a technical perspective, right, to where it could be, right? If you contrast it, say, to banking, the banks have kind of really, most people would agree, a step or two ahead, right, from a technical front, from a digital perspective, et cetera, right? Across all things, from analytics, the kind of sophistication around, targeting customers and things like that. And so I think my view around that is there's so many opportunities to actually innovate in insurance now that there's a lot of room for both incumbents and a lot of the new Insurtechs. I think what I like about the Insurtechs is that the philosophy is slightly different. Again, depends how far you go back from an Insurtech versus a non. But I would say the contrast is that in the, let's go older days, which probably not that long ago, like 15 years ago, I guess, the play was still very much a, let's call it an evolution of the on-premise kind of ERP, core systems play, right? You kind of go back in thinking in history, the thinking around software was, hey, we're going to build a system. It does everything. Why? Because cost of integration is expensive, right? So, we put it all together, processes and all, that's what we sell. And used to be on-premise, then we moved it to the cloud, right? We literally picked it up and then moved it to the cloud. And the real innovation came, I think, when open standards occurred, API standards, things like that. And I think this is kind of then the age of all of the Insurtechs now that are not trying to say, hey, I'm a better version of the core system now, because there's a lot of incumbents in that space. But because of open standards and technologies, I can target value in parts of the value chain, right? And that's kind of, at least my distinction between some of the more traditional players versus Insurtech. And net, that's great for the industry, right? So whether that be, advanced product engines, to distribution type technologies, engaging customers in various different ways, to claims leakage and fraud. There's many things, right, that you can do to optimize what you can do with technology in an insurer. And I think this is a really good place to be. And I think the biggest barrier, I would say, is actually culture change, right? I think, again, a lot of the tech is there, but a lot of insurers are still operating with very traditional models and mindsets, and just the way they've been doing it all along, right? And I think this is changing, over time, and I think that's the exciting part about the industry right now.
Yeah, and that brings me maybe to the next and final question, as it's such a big hype around data.
Yeah.
How will the insurance landscape evolve in an AI-driven world?
Yeah, big question. Like everyone's excited about AI. I personally believe that it will kind of drive the next wave of real innovation, but it's not there yet, right? My view at the moment, AI, most of what we see today, most of the hype, NVIDIA, OpenAI, and others, Copilot, and Microsoft, is simply just the beginning. And mostly what I consider kind of infrastructure level innovation, right, happening right now. I think what hasn't happened yet is delivering real value, right, through AI, like business value, human value, right, through AI. And yes, you could get AI to rewrite your emails, but I do envisage that in time, we will find ways to, say, get AI to write better products, to make better insurance products, to better engage customers at and when they need to, right? To create and enable dynamic protection, right? As you kind of know today, because of limitations in core systems and manpower, I guess, and things like that, many products are quite static, right? It's one product, you buy it, and hopefully it fits you mostly, but it'll never be perfect, right? But I think the technology is moving in the direction where this could be very possible in the future. It could be very possible, I think, definitely not even that far away, where your phone, could be automatically asking you to buy insurance products, right? Go off, search for the best one that fits your need, and do that transaction, right, with minimal interaction from you, right? I think that world is not that far off. I think when you combine what AI is enabling with, I think, what we just discussed, which around embedded insurance, I think these two things actually collide and come really well together, right? Yeah. But yeah, so super exciting what I think will emerge, particularly in the next couple of years, in terms of how AI will make a real difference, right, with insurers. So.
And it's going to be interesting coming back to Tesla once it's autonomous driving, and what the insurance then also needs to hold to make sure it covers.
It's I think that's been in debate. I know, working with insurers in this space, actually, specifically on this topic, it's been talked about for many years, right? And it's kind of coming. So it's interesting, and I think just if you unpack that a little bit, you start to realize that, again, if you go back to the basics of protection and, what is motor insurance, it's, again, risk management and investment management, right, of those premiums. And the way you drive risk in this case is with data. And Tesla's advantage is they have a lot of data on their cars and how they drive and how people drive, etc. And arguably, with the right models, they can better risk premium their drivers, arguably, right? And this is why I think it's important to go back to the fundamentals, right? I think some people would say, making cars and doing insurance are completely different things. They are completely different things, but I think what brings those two together in this example is data and risk, right? Both of which are very doable. So I think it's interesting. I mean, that's, again, just one microcosm of an example, right? Where, like I said, the convergence of the industry both ways, right? Is causing a lot of interest in the application of technology in the rethinking of how the business works, right? And therefore new challenges and new opportunities at the same time. So
absolutely. I think to summarize it a bit, as we are now towards the end, so good segue from embedded insurance, which I think we all are waiting for, that it's more embedded into our life and the good experiences rather than the bad ones. But then also leveraging data, making insurance more bespoke, the products more bespoke. In an AI-driven world, of course, it's both an opportunity, but maybe also a threat. For sure, cyber insurance, a very important element to talk about. There's much more, and I'm excited to work with you, of course, in really innovating the industry. I'm sure we will do a follow-up where we go into a few more details, but it was a good overview on the landscape overall. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Any last words, anything you want to share?
No, I'm super excited. Like I said, the convergence of really financial services with technology, I think, is more exciting than ever before. I think we're on the cusp, with AI and other things as well. I think more than just AI. I think really there's a huge potential, literally waves of innovation, I think, that will happen, right, looking forward. And even though I've been in the industry for what seems like a very long time, 25 odd years, I'm probably more excited now than before. I think probably even more than the advent of the internet, right, which is kind of near the early days of my career. Really kind of change how we did technology, right? And I do expect that that in conjunction with digital, in conjunction with AI advancements in tech, right? Probably not in its current form, but in kind of advanced forms that we'll see in the next couple of years, will really change the way we interact, right, with financial services industries, right, and things like that. So yeah, super exciting.
Exciting for an engineer, but also someone who's into an adventure. So it's going to be adventurous. So thank you so much, Shui Lim. And with this, you find our Pulse Check podcast, of course, online and all social media. And talk to you again soon.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Cheers.